The desert didn't do quiet the way people imagined. It didn't hush the world into peace. It stripped it down. It took sound and comfort and excuses and left you with the honest noise of distance. Wind dragging grit across asphalt, an old sign rattling on tired bolts, the faint electrical whine of a transformer trying to remember why it still worked. Officer Ethan Cole liked that kind of honesty. He drove with both hands on the wheel even though the highway was empty for miles. Not because he was tense, because it kept his body honest too, kept it from drifting into habits he'd spent years pretending weren't habits. The sun had already started to flatten into copper behind a line of low hills, and the sky held that brittle, washed-out blue that made everything look exposed. Beside him, Shadow sat in the back, separated by a steel partition. Not pacing, not whining, not performing the eager dog routine people expected from German shepherds on the internet. Shadow was assembled, front paws planted, spine straight, eyes tracking the world through the side window with the same focused patience Ethan had seen on search operations at 3 a.m, when everyone else was tired enough to make mistakes and the dog stayed sharp anyway. Ethan didn't need to look back to feel it. Shadow's attention had shifted, not excited, not curious. Alert in the way a smoke alarm is alert, because something changed in the environment that shouldn't have. The motel appeared ahead like a thought someone abandoned halfway through. One story of stucco that had once been cream-colored and now looked like sun-bleached bone. 10 doors in a row, most of their numbers missing. A cracked swimming pool filled with sand and a shopping cart. A neon sign that used to promise vacancy in bright red, but now only managed a tired VA_A_C county liquidation. That was the phrase in the paperwork. The whole thing had been sold off as if it were a box of mismatched plates. A property nobody wanted, in a county nobody thought about, for a price low enough that it felt like a joke. Ethan had taken the joke, not because he was reckless, because he had done the math and the math had come out clean. He had money saved. He had no family left to argue with him. He had a pension that existed on paper and trust issues that existed everywhere else. And he had Shadow. A motel in the desert was a place you could disappear. No neighbors close enough to watch your routine, no friendly small talk, no department politics, no sirens hitting your nervous system like a trigger you couldn't admit you still had. He pulled into the lot, gravel crunching under tires. The truck rolled to a stop facing the office. The front window was a dull mirror reflecting the sky, and for a second, Ethan saw himself in it. Just a shape behind glass, a silhouette, in a place where silhouettes got swallowed fast. He killed the engine. Silence fell in a way that wasn't silence. It was the absence of human noise. The desert kept its own soundtrack going. He opened the door, stepped out, and the air immediately hit him, dry, sharp, carrying the scent of dust and creosote like a warning label. Shadow's nails clicked once against metal. Ethan popped the rear latch. Shadow moved out smoothly, like water with a spine. He hit the ground and didn't wander, didn't stretch, didn't do anything that said, new place, fun place. He stood, ears forward, head angled slightly toward the office, as if he were listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. Ethan studied the building again. A motel office shouldn't feel like it was holding its breath, but this one did. All right, Ethan murmured, more to himself than to Shadow. Let's see what I bought. He walked to the office door. The lock resisted at first, then gave with a small, exhausted click. Inside, stale air rolled out. Old carpet, old paper, old nicotine. The lobby was small, 2 mismatched chairs, a counter with a bell that had long ago decided it was optional. Shadow entered behind him, silent. Ethan flicked a flashlight on and swept it across the room. Dust spun in the beam. A guest log lay open on the counter, its last entry dated months ago. A coffee maker sat in the corner like a relic. Everything looked abandoned. Everything except Shadow. Shadow's posture tightened. His head turned slightly, not toward the lobby, but toward the door behind the counter that led to the back hall. He gave no bark, just a slow, controlled inhale, and a stillness that made Ethan's spine go cold. Someone had been here, recently. Ethan didn't reach for a weapon the way he used to overseas, because this wasn't that world. But his body did what it always did. It aligned. Weight balanced, shoulders loose, eyes scanning corners and exits. He lowered the flashlight beam toward the floor. Fresh scuffs, not old dirt dragged by the wind. Shoe marks. And something else, faint, almost swallowed by dust, a footprint smaller than his. Shadow moved 2 steps forward, then stopped again, staring at the back hall. Ethan exhaled slowly. He'd come here to be alone. The desert, apparently, had other plans. He didn't call out. Names were invitations. If someone was here and meant harm, you didn't give them a target to aim at. If someone was here and terrified, you didn't announce yourself like a threat. Ethan stepped behind the counter, careful with his footing. The door to the back hall was closed. A cheap interior knob, no deadbolt. Shadow sat at his heel, not touching him, but close enough that Ethan could feel the heat of his presence. That was the thing with a good canine partner. They didn't crowd you. They anchored you. Ethan turned the knob. The door swung open a few inches and stopped, caught on something heavy. Ethan leaned, peered through the crack. The beam of his flashlight cut into the hall and found a chair wedged against the door from the inside. Barricade. Ethan's mouth went dry. He spoke softly, voice low and even. "Whoever you are, I'm not here to hurt you." Silence. Shadow's ears twitched. His nose flared once. Ethan tried again. "I bought this place today. County sale. I'm the only one with keys. If you're hiding, you don't have to do it alone." A breath, not his. A small, sharp inhale from somewhere beyond the door. Then a voice, thin from dehydration and held together by will. "Don't open it." Ethan froze. A woman's voice. Young but not childish, controlled in the way professionals sounded when they were trying very hard not to panic. "If you open it," she whispered, "they'll know." Ethan didn't move. He lowered his flashlight beam to the floor so it wouldn't shine into her eyes through the crack. "They who?" Silence then. "Please, just step back." Ethan looked at Shadow. Shadow looked at the door. No barking, no lunging, just watchfulness. A quiet assessment that told Ethan something important. Whoever was behind that barricade wasn't a threat to them. Shadow would have smelled adrenaline, aggression, intent. This was fear. Ethan stepped back from the door and raised both hands slightly, palms open, more gesture than performance. "Okay, I'm backing up." He took 3 steps away, enough to prove he could follow instructions. The chair scraped against the floor. The sound was loud in the dead hallway. The door opened slowly. A woman appeared in the crack. She held a screwdriver like a weapon, but her grip was shaking. Her hair was pulled back hastily, dark strands falling loose around a face pale with exhaustion. Dirt smudged her cheek. A cut on one knuckle had dried blood at the edges. Her eyes locked onto Ethan first, sharp, assessing, not begging. Then her gaze dropped to Shadow. Shadow sat, still, ears forward, eyes steady, not predatory. He made himself small in the way only trained dogs did, deliberately reducing pressure. The woman swallowed. Something in her expression softened, just a fraction. Ethan kept his voice calm. "My name is Ethan Cole. This is Shadow." Her throat moved. "I'm Dr. Lena Moore." Ethan's brain registered the title immediately. Doctor meant training, discipline, logic. Someone who didn't spook easily. So, if she was spooked now, it wasn't imaginary. Ethan nodded once. "Okay, Dr. Moore, are you hurt?" "No." She said it fast, then corrected herself. Not badly. I'm dehydrated. I haven't slept." "You're safe for the moment," Ethan said. He didn't promise more than he could guarantee. "Come sit. I've got water in the truck." Lena hesitated, eyes flicking to the lobby windows as if expecting headlights to appear any second. "I can't be seen." Ethan understood the logic immediately. If someone was watching the motel, a figure moving inside the office could be enough. He pointed to the floor behind the counter. "There's a line of sight from the window to here. You're not in it. We can keep you out of it." She watched him for a beat, measuring him the way he measured rooms. Then she stepped forward, staying close to the wall, screwdriver still in hand. Shadow didn't move toward her. He waited. Lena passed within a few feet. Shadow's nose lifted, sampling scent, fear, sweat, dust, something metallic, and the faint chemical tang of antiseptic like she'd treated her own hands. Lena flinched at the motion, then paused. Shadow lowered his head and looked away. A silent message. "I see you. I'm not here to pressure you." Lena's shoulders lowered by a millimeter. Ethan went to the front door, cracked it open, scanned the lot. No cars, no movement, only the desert turning darker. He retrieved a jug of water from the truck, brought it in, and set it down behind the counter. Lena drank like someone trying not to make noise, but her hands betrayed her, shaking just enough to show how long she'd been holding herself together. Ethan didn't push. He waited. Shadow lay down near the hallway entrance, positioned where he could see both the lobby and the back corridor. A habit born from 1,000 nights of not trusting doors. When Lena finally spoke, her voice was steadier, not because fear had left, but because she'd made a decision. "You said you bought this place today." "Yes." "For how much?" Ethan met her eyes. "Less than it should have been." Lena's mouth tightened. "Because nobody wants it. Because it's tied to a case nobody wants reopened." Ethan didn't react outwardly. Inside, something clicked into place. He'd spent years in law enforcement learning the difference between coincidence and pattern. Pattern was how people got killed. Lena swallowed. "A man died last month. Official report says gas leak. Accident." Her eyes hardened. It wasn't. Ethan felt Shadow's head lift slightly. Lena continued, words coming faster now, like a dam giving way. "He was a contractor. He was supposed to testify about falsified invoices tied to a development project. He called me the day before he died. He said he'd found something that would end careers." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And then he died." "Yes." She looked down at her hands. "And then I started getting followed. A truck that showed up twice at my apartment. A man who stood across the street pretending to smoke. My phone. My accounts. Someone tried to make me look unstable, like grief was making me hallucinate." Ethan knew that playbook. He'd seen it in domestic cases, in corruption cases, in departments that protected their own. Lena's voice dropped. "I have a recording." Ethan didn't move. "Of what?" "A meeting." She looked at him directly now. "A threat, planning language, not a confession, but the kind of thing that proves intent." "And it's here," Ethan said. Lena nodded once. "Hidden in the motel office. If they find it first, I'm done. If they find me first." She didn't finish. Ethan understood the unfinished sentence. He leaned back slightly, not relaxing, grounding. Why hide here? Lena's laugh was quiet and bitter. "Because it was the only place that made sense. The motel's been vacant. The county's been dragging its feet on paperwork. And whoever's running this thinks nobody would be stupid enough to buy it." Ethan watched her, then glanced toward the lobby window. He saw what she saw. The motel wasn't just a building. It was a holding pen for a secret. "And you were waiting," Ethan said slowly, "for a window, a moment to retrieve it, or a moment to run." Lena's eyes flicked to Shadow again. "I didn't expect help." Ethan didn't call it providence, didn't call it fate. He called it timing. And timing was something Ethan trusted only when he controlled it. "Tell me where it is," Ethan said. Lena hesitated. Then, "In the ceiling fixture of the motel office, the old smoke detector casing near the record shelf. I put a micro recorder card inside. If someone opens it, it looks like junk." Ethan nodded once, already mapping the room in his head. "And someone's watching this place." "I think so." Lena's fingers tightened around the screwdriver. "I saw headlights pass twice last night. Slow." Ethan glanced at Shadow. Shadow's ears angled toward the lot as if he'd been listening to those headlights long before Lena knew to fear them. Ethan stood. "Okay." Lena's head snapped up. "Okay? Okay. Means we move before night fully closes." Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Not because night is scary. Because night gives watchers confidence. And confidence makes people careless." Lena's breathing quickened. "You don't understand. They're not. This isn't." Ethan lifted a hand gently, stopping her without dismissing her. "I understand enough. I'm not promising you a miracle. I'm promising you a plan." He looked at Shadow. "Stay." Shadow didn't move. Ethan moved to the office window again, checked angles, no vehicles, no figures. He returned behind the counter, crouched so he was level with Lena, less imposing. "This is how it goes," Ethan said. "You stay here, out of the windows. I retrieve the card. Shadow comes with me. If we get made, we don't fight for pride. We fight for exit." Lena stared at him like she was deciding whether to trust the calmness in his voice. Then she gave a small nod. "If you take it, and they know, they'll come." Ethan's eyes didn't blink. "Then we make sure when they come, we're ready." Shadow stood, not excited, ready. They waited 15 minutes, not because Ethan liked waiting, but because he liked confirming. During those 15 minutes, the motel revealed its small truths. A faint smell of cigarette smoke near the back door that hadn't been there earlier. A dust line along the office threshold disturbed recently. A light buzz behind the vending machine as if it had power when the breaker panel said it shouldn't. Lena watched Ethan notice these things. She didn't interrupt. She simply looked, startled, in a way that wasn't fear this time, recognition. She had been trying to survive by instinct and exhaustion. Ethan was surviving by discipline. Shadow prowled silently in a tight radius, nose to floor, then to air, then to the base of the window frame. He paused once and looked at Ethan. Ethan didn't need words. Shadow had caught something outside. Ethan moved to the crack in the blinds and looked out. Headlights. Far on the highway, slow enough to suggest a turn might be coming. He watched the lights approach, then pass without turning in. Not proof, but enough. "Someone's checking," Ethan murmured. Lena's throat moved. "They do that. They don't come in. They just confirm I'm still trapped." Ethan felt a quiet heat in his chest. Anger, but contained. Anger without containment was noise. Noise got people killed. He reached into his duffel and pulled out two things, a small headlamp with a red filter and a thin pair of gloves. He handed the headlamp to Lena. "Red light if you need to move. Don't use white. White shows in the windows." Lena took it, fingers trembling less now. "You've done this before." Ethan's mouth tightened. Different places. Same principle. He crouched beside Shadow, clipped a short lead onto his harness, not because Shadow needed it, but because it let Ethan communicate in half-ounce pressure shifts. "You know the rules," Ethan whispered. Shadow's tail gave one slow, controlled sway. They moved. Ethan didn't go through the lobby. He went behind the counter, through the hall Lena had barricaded, and into the back maintenance corridor. It led to the motel office from the rear, out of the front window's line of sight. The corridor smelled like rust and old bleach. Ethan walked with his shoulders loose, feet careful. Shadow moved ahead by a half step, stopping at corners, checking air currents like he was reading invisible text. They reached the motel office door. It was locked. Lena had said the smoke detector casing was near the record shelf inside. Ethan pulled his multi-tool, slid a thin pick into the cheap lock seam. He didn't like breaking in. He didn't like leaving traces, but the county had sold him the building. The lock was a lie anyway. The latch gave. Ethan opened the door inch by inch. The office was small, cramped, and stale with the smell of old paper. Filing cabinets lined the wall. A desk sat under a bulletin board with faded business cards and a map of local roads. Ethan swept the room with his red filter light, slow, deliberate. No one inside. Shadow stepped in, nose low, then lifted toward the ceiling. The smoke detector casing sat above the record shelf, just like Lena said. Ethan moved carefully, dragged a chair without scraping it too loudly, stepped up. He twisted the casing. It came loose in his hand. Inside, a tiny microcard nestled in foam. Evidence. Ethan's pulse didn't spike. It steadied. This was what he understood. Small objects that mattered more than loud promises. He slid the card into a protective sleeve, then into the inner pocket of his jacket. He replaced the casing exactly as he found it. Shadow stiffened. Not fear. Signal. Ethan froze, listening. Footsteps outside, not in the building. In the gravel lot, two sets, one heavier, one lighter. They stopped near the office window. A flashlight beam swept across the blinds, slow and searching. Ethan killed his light. Shadow stood rigid, ears forward. A voice drifted through the glass, muffled, irritated. "You sure she's still here?" Another voice, lower. "Boss wants confirmation. That's what we do." The beam paused on the desk, then moved. Ethan's mind mapped exit routes instantly. Back corridor, hall, lobby, front door, two exposed. Rear maintenance door, better, but only if it wasn't watched. He placed one hand on Shadow's harness, pressure light as a breath. Shadow understood, silent. The flashlight beam returned, sharper now, catching something on the floor. The voice changed. That chair wasn't there before. Ethan's stomach went cold, not because the chair mattered, because it meant someone outside was paying attention to details. Ethan shifted one step back toward the maintenance corridor door. Shadow moved with him, shadowing his movement like an extension of his body. The flashlight beam snapped toward the back hallway window. "Hey," the lighter voice called, "I saw something move." The motel office door handle rattled. Ethan didn't hesitate. He opened the maintenance corridor door, slipped out with Shadow, and closed it gently behind them. Footsteps rushed toward the office entrance. Ethan and Shadow moved down the maintenance corridor, not running. Running echoed. They moved fast in the way professionals moved fast, controlled, quiet, committed. They reached the back hall. A flashlight beam slashed across the far end, coming in from a side door. Another entry point. Ethan made a decision in half a second, not toward the lobby, not toward exposure. He went toward the utility room where Lena waited. Shadow moved first. As they approached, Shadow's head turned, listening behind them. The sound of the office door being forced open, a curse, a radio crackle. Ethan felt the weight of the microcard in his pocket, like a pulse. They reached Lena's door. Ethan tapped twice, soft, a signal. The door opened instantly. Lena's eyes widened when she saw Ethan's expression. "They're here." Ethan slipped inside, closed the door, and immediately moved the chair back into place, barricade restored. Shadow positioned himself by the crack under the door, body angled, ready. Ethan pulled the card out and held it up. Lena's breath caught. "You got it," she whispered, like she didn't dare believe it. Ethan nodded once. "Now we don't let them take it." Outside, the motel's gravel lot stayed silent, but silence like this wasn't peace. It was predators listening to prey. The first knock didn't sound like a knock. It sounded like ownership. A heavy fist against the utility door, confident enough to believe the wood would obey. "Open up," a voice called. Not shouting, not pleading, commanding. Lena's face drained of color. Her hand gripped the screwdriver again, but Ethan saw it for what it was, an instinct to have something, anything, in her hands. Ethan didn't touch her. He didn't take the tool away. He simply lowered his voice to the level of breath. "You're not going to talk," he said, "not because you're weak, because words give away fear." Lena's eyes locked on his. She swallowed. "They'll break it down." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but not quickly if they think there's risk." Shadow made a sound then, a low, controlled rumble. Not a bark, a warning. The kind of sound that told any intelligent human, there's a trained dog on the other side, and you don't know what else. The voice outside paused. Then, with a new edge, "You got a dog in there?" Ethan kept his breathing steady. He leaned close to the door, not touching it, just close enough to speak through it without raising volume. "This property is owned," Ethan said calmly. "County sale. You're trespassing." A beat. Then a laugh, short and humorless. "That paperwork don't mean a thing, man." Ethan's gaze flicked to the utility room's small rear vent, an opening to the outside service alley. Not big enough for him. Possibly big enough for Shadow? No. Too tight. The only way out was through the building, which meant this wasn't about escaping. It was about timing. Headlights swept across the utility room's thin vent slats. They were circling the building now. Lena's breath came faster. Ethan turned to her. "When Maria gets here, this changes. You said you called her." Lena nodded, almost imperceptible. "She's on her way. Lucas, too. They were closest." Ethan believed her, because the call had been the one smart thing a scared person did, reach out to someone who still cared about truth. A second knock, harder, hit the door. Shadow's rumble deepened. The voice outside lowered. "Last chance." Ethan's mind ran options again. If the door came down, they could hold this room for seconds, not minutes. He could disable one attacker. Shadow could disable another. But there were at least two, maybe more, and the goal wasn't to win a fight. The goal was to keep Lena alive and the evidence intact. A radio crackle sounded outside, muffled words. Then the voice. "We got company." Ethan's eyes narrowed. More headlights? Or law? The footsteps retreated fast. Lena blinked, stunned. "What?" Ethan raised a hand. "Listen." Outside, tires rolled on gravel. Not slow, not cautious, urgent. A car door slammed. A voice carried through the motel lot, loud and official. "Gallatin County! Step away from the building!" Lena's eyes filled suddenly, not with tears yet, just with the shock of relief trying to exist in a body that hadn't allowed relief in days. Ethan didn't relax. Not yet. He moved to the utility room's small window and peered through a crack. A patrol SUV had pulled in, lights flashing, painting the motel in red and blue, another vehicle behind it. Two figures moved with purpose, one with the posture of command, the other quicker, younger. Captain Maria Hayes, Deputy Lucas Reed. Ethan recognized Maria even from distance. Pragmatic stance, shoulders squared, the kind of calm that didn't rise to meet chaos. Lucas moved like caffeine in a uniform, scanning, hand near his holster, eyes wide but focused. The armed guards in the lot backed away, hands visible now that consequences had arrived. Ethan exhaled, slow. He looked at Lena. Now. He shifted the barricade, opened the door, and stepped out with Shadow at heel. Maria's eyes met Ethan's immediately. Recognition, a flicker of relief, then professionalism snapping into place. "Ethan," Maria said, voice steady. "Report." Ethan didn't waste words. He held up the protective sleeve. "Recording, threat language, planning, microcard." Lena stepped out behind him, shoulders tight but upright. Lucas's gaze snapped to her. "Dr. Moore, you're okay." Lena nodded once, swallowing hard. "I'm okay." Maria's attention moved to the guards, two men in work jackets, pretending they were just checking the property. Maria's voice sharpened. "Hands where I can see them, on your knees." They hesitated. Shadow took one step forward, silent, eyes locked. That was all it took. Both men dropped to their knees, hands up. Ethan didn't feel triumph. He felt the next phase forming, because the motel lot was only the beginning. The people who sent those guards would come again. The question was whether the law would move faster than the threat. Maria stepped close to Ethan, kept her voice low. "You bought this place?" "Today," Maria's mouth tightened. "Of course you did." Ethan handed her the sleeve. "Chain of custody matters. This stays clean." Maria's eyes held his for a beat. Respect and something heavier, trust. Then she nodded and tucked it carefully into an evidence bag. Lucas looked around the motel lot, jaw tight. "We gonna pretend this is normal?" Maria didn't even glance at him. "No." She looked back to Ethan. "We take them in, we get a warrant. We move before whoever's behind them deletes the rest of the trail." Ethan's gaze moved to Lena. Lena's face was pale, but her eyes were sharp again, intellect returning like a weapon. "I can analyze it," she said. "I can explain what it means, why it matters." Maria nodded. "Good." Shadow sat beside Ethan, pressed close enough that Ethan felt the steady warmth against his boot. For the first time since arriving, Ethan realized something. He hadn't bought silence. He had bought a battlefield with paperwork. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was back to what he'd always been, a man who didn't let predators hunt in peace. The sheriff's substation in Red Hollow looked like every small building that had learned to survive on thin budgets and thick routines. Fluorescent lights that hummed, scuffed tile, a coffee pot that had done more overtime than half the county. Captain Maria Hayes didn't waste time on atmosphere. She moved like a woman who understood that the world didn't pause for paperwork. Only justice did, and only if you let it. Ethan followed her through the front doors, with Shadow at heel. Lena walked between them, shoulders tight, head up like she was forcing her body to remember it was allowed to exist in daylight again. Deputy Lucas Reed trailed behind, half a step too fast, eyes scanning the hallway, like he expected another ambush at every corner. Maria held the evidence bag like it was fragile and explosive at the same time. Because it was. She didn't take it to the property room first. She took it to a small interview room with a single table, a laptop, and a wall clock that ticked loud enough to feel like pressure. "Door closed," Maria said. Lucas shut it. Maria turned to Lena. "You told dispatch you had a recording." Lena nodded. "Yes." Maria glanced at Ethan. "You retrieved it?" "Yes." "Any contact?" Ethan's gaze went distant for a fraction. "2 guards. They checked the office. They almost made us." Maria didn't ask for embellishment. She didn't need it. She'd been in enough rooms with enough survivors to know when almost meant seconds. She turned back to Lena. "You're giving a statement. Full, chronological, no guessing. If you don't know, you say you don't know. Understood?" Lena swallowed, then nodded again, once, firm. "Understood." Maria set the evidence bag on the table, pulled on gloves, and slid the microcard into a reader connected to the laptop. Her movements were precise, practiced. Chain of custody wasn't a buzzword to her, it was a lifeline. Lucas hovered near the wall like a kid who wanted to be useful and didn't know where to put his hands. Ethan sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, not because he didn't trust Maria or Lucas, but because he trusted the world even less. Shadow lay down beside Ethan's chair, body angled so he could see both the door and Lena. He didn't look at the laptop. He looked at the humans, reading tension, breath, micro-movements. The real story was always in those. Maria clicked the file. The screen filled with grainy video, a cramped motel office, the same angle Ethan had been standing under minutes earlier, just from a different day. Audio came through faint at first, then clearer as a voice moved closer. A man's voice, smooth, controlled, irritated the way men sounded when they believed they were entitled to compliance. Another voice, tired, sharper, refusing to be softened. Lena's chest tightened. Ethan saw it before she could hide it. Maria didn't watch Lena. She watched the file timestamp. She watched the file properties. She watched what would matter later in court when someone would try to twist the truth into noise. The audio shifted. The smooth voice said something that made the room feel colder. "You keep pushing," the man on the recording said, measured, "and you'll regret it. I'm being generous right now. Don't make me stop." Lena's eyes fixed on the table, jaw clenched so tight her cheek muscles trembled. The other voice replied, someone trying to sound calm while fear edged behind the words. "You can't threaten," the smooth voice cut in. "I can do whatever I want if no one's left to argue." A pause. Then, like a door closing gently. "You understand accidents happen out here. Gas lines, bad wiring, a little spark, and tragedy." Lucas's face drained. Maria's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened in a way that told Ethan she was already building the legal bridge in her mind. Threat language, planning language, implied intent. The recording continued. The smooth voice laid out fragments. Nothing clean enough to be a confession, everything dirty enough to make a pattern. "Make the numbers match. Move it before inspection. People like you don't get to ruin this." Then a sound, a chair scraping, someone standing. The file ended with a final line that sat in the room like smoke. "Disappear, Lena, before you force me to erase you." Maria stopped the playback. For a moment, nobody spoke. The wall clock kept ticking. Shadow lifted his head and looked at Lena. He didn't move closer. He didn't crowd. But his eyes stayed on her, steady, present, the quiet reminder that she wasn't alone in the room anymore. Lena exhaled like she'd been holding her lungs shut for days. Her voice came out thin but controlled. "That's him." Maria's gaze stayed on the laptop. "Name?" Lena swallowed. "The developer's project manager. He's the one coordinating the deal." Maria's mouth tightened. "We're not saying names yet. We're building facts." Lucas couldn't help himself. That's basically saying he's going to blow someone up." Maria's eyes cut to him. "It's saying intent. It's saying planning. It's saying intimidation. That's enough to justify the next step if we corroborate." Ethan finally spoke. "The guards were there for the recording." Maria nodded once. "Which means whoever this is thinks it exists." She turned to Lena. "Your statement matters. Your timeline matters. Every interaction, every time you were followed, every time you were contacted. We build cause. We build a warrant." Lena's hands shook slightly. She pressed them flat on the table, grounding herself. "I can help you interpret what he meant by numbers match. I've been looking at the invoices." Maria's eyebrows rose a fraction. "You've been looking at financial documents?" "Yes," Lena said, a spark of anger flashing through fear. "They tried to make me look irrational, so I did the opposite. I documented everything." Ethan felt something like approval settle in his chest. Not admiration, respect. She'd chosen discipline over panic, just like him. Maria pushed a notepad toward Lena. "Then we start there. You explain what you know. Lucas, you take names down." Lucas snapped into motion like he'd been waiting for permission. "Yes, ma'am." Lena took a breath, then began, chronological, exact. She described the contractor who died, the accident that didn't feel accidental. She described the invoices that didn't match deliveries. She described how the project manager brushed her off with corporate calm, then escalated into quiet threats when she didn't fold. She described the motel office meeting, why she recorded it, and the moment she realized she wasn't dealing with simple fraud. She described the surveillance, the slow truck, the same headlights, the way her phone would glitch after certain calls, the way her apartment hallway would smell like cigarette smoke when she didn't smoke. Maria wrote little. She listened. When Lena finished, Maria stood and opened the door. The hallway outside was quiet. "We're going to do this the right way," Maria said, voice low. "No hero moves, no shortcuts that compromise chain. Ethan, you and Shadow stay with Lena. Lucas, you're with me." Lucas's eyes widened. "Where are we going?" Maria looked at him like the answer was obvious. "To get a warrant." The judge on call was an older man with a tired face and a sharper mind than his eyes suggested. He didn't care about drama. He cared about legal thresholds. Maria laid out the facts without flinching. Witness statement. Recording containing explicit threat language and planning references. Evidence of attempted retrieval by guards at the motel. A dead contractor labeled accidental. Financial discrepancies tied to the development project. The judge's gaze moved between Maria and the paperwork, then to Lucas, who stood stiffly like his body wanted to salute. "What do you want access to?" the judge asked. Maria didn't hesitate. "The incident site reports, utility records, any sealed investigative material from the initial accident, and permission to reopen the scene for forensic re-examination. Also, warrants for digital financial records tied to the project." The judge's eyes narrowed. "You think the accident was staged?" Maria's voice didn't rise. "I think there is probable cause to believe it was. And I think if we wait, evidence disappears." The judge's pen paused. "You're not county sheriff." "I'm state oversight assigned to the region," Maria said evenly. "And the sheriff is requesting assistance. We're not stepping over jurisdiction. We're reinforcing it." The judge stared for a long moment. Then he signed. Lucas let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Maria took the warrants, nodded once, and walked out without triumph. Ethan, waiting in the hallway with Shadow and Lena, watched her approach. Maria held up the papers. Ethan's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "You got it," Maria nodded. "Now we move before they adapt." They drove in a tight convoy, Maria and Lucas in the lead, Ethan and Lena behind, Shadow in the rear seat, watching the world like a silent radar system. The accident site was outside town, near a half-finished utility corridor where gas lines had been laid for future development. The desert air out there felt different, less open, more watched, as if land itself knew when something bad had happened on it. When they arrived, the sun was low again, painting everything in thin gold and long shadows. Maria stepped out first, warrant folder in hand. Lucas followed, scanning, trying to look calm. Ethan opened his door and Shadow stepped out, posture changing the moment his paws hit the sand. The dog's head lifted, nostrils flaring, reading scent layers that humans didn't even know existed. Lena stood beside Ethan, arms folded tight. Her eyes locked on the site like she was forcing herself not to blink. Maria approached a fenced-off area where a scorched patch of ground marked the reported gas leak explosion. A small memorial marker, cheap, temporary, sat nearby like an afterthought. Maria spoke quietly. "No one touches anything until we document." Lucas pulled out a camera. Ethan stayed a few steps back with Lena, letting Maria run the scene. He didn't need to be the loudest person to be the center. He was the center because he held the calm. Shadow's ears twitched. He moved a few feet to the side and sniffed along the fence posts. Then he stopped. His posture stiffened. Ethan followed his gaze. There. Fresh cigarette butts near the fence line. Recent, not weeks old, not buried by wind. Someone had been here, watching. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He didn't say it out loud yet. He filed it. Maria's voice cut through the silence. "We need forensic confirmation. That's step one." Lena spoke, voice steady now. "If the gas line failed naturally, there'd be a predictable fracture pattern. If someone loosened a valve or compromised a fitting, the tool marks will show." Maria glanced back at her. "You've done this before?" Lena's lips pressed thin. "I'm an analyst. I know what accidents look like when they're real." Maria nodded. "Then you'll walk me through what to look for." Lucas shifted his weight. "We got actual forensics coming?" Maria didn't look at him. "We are the forensics until the lab backs us up. Document everything. Bag what we can legally bag." They moved carefully, methodical. Maria crouched beside a charred section of pipe and used a gloved hand to trace the metal edges. "This should be torn," she murmured. "Random, chaotic." Lena leaned in, careful not to cross contamination. "But it's clean," she said, voice tight. "See the angle? That's not a rupture. That's stress after manipulation." Lucas swallowed. "You're saying someone messed with it." Lena's eyes flashed. "I'm saying the line didn't betray itself. Someone betrayed it." Ethan watched Lena's face, how the fear had hardened into something sharper, more useful. Shadow shifted, sniffed along the ground, then moved toward a nearby utility box. He stopped and sat, staring. Ethan walked over, following the dog's focus. A panel on the utility box looked slightly misaligned. Ethan didn't touch it. He didn't break chain. He called out calmly, "Maria, Shadow's indicating something." Maria crossed over, eyes narrowing. She examined the panel, then photographed it. "Good catch." Lucas leaned closer. "That looks tampered." Maria's voice stayed flat. "We log it. We bag what we can. We send it in." The sun sank lower, the shadows lengthened. In the distance, a vehicle passed slowly on the access road, too slowly. Ethan's head turned just enough to watch. The vehicle didn't stop, but it didn't speed up either. It just observed. Ethan felt the old itch between his shoulder blades, being watched, measured, catalogued. He didn't move toward the road. He didn't give them the satisfaction of reaction. He simply stepped a little closer to Lena, subtly putting himself between her and the line of sight. Shadow stood and moved to Ethan's other side, a living wall. Maria finished the documentation and stood, dusting her gloves. "We have enough to send to the lab. Next step, financial trail." Lena's jaw tightened. "That's where motive lives." Maria nodded. "And motive turns threat language into intent." Lucas's eyes darted. "And who exactly are we going after?" Maria's gaze sharpened. "Whoever thinks they can kill people and call it business." The financial legwork wasn't glamorous. It was phone calls, subpoenas, and hours of staring at records while the desert night bled into morning. It was Lucas driving between offices like a courier, returning with printed statements and signatures and missing funds that told the truth in numbers. Ethan sat at a desk in the substation with Shadow at his feet and Lena across from him, both of them hunched over documents. Lena pointed at a line item. "This vendor doesn't exist," she said, voice tired but precise. "No registration, no tax ID, but they've been paid in consistent amounts." Ethan's eyes tracked the pattern. "Laundry," Lena nodded. "Yes, and that money disappears into a shell account, then reappears as consulting fees tied to the project manager's personal business." Maria entered the room with Lucas. Lucas looked like he hadn't slept, but he was trying to be proud of his fatigue like it was a badge. Maria laid a folder on the table. Utility records came back. Lena's head snapped up. "And," Maria's voice was steady, "the line that failed had maintenance logged the day before the explosion, unscheduled, signed off by a subcontractor tied to the same shell vendor." Lena's eyes flared with vindication. "That's not coincidence." Ethan felt something settle in his chest, tight and heavy. Cause and effect. Pattern. Maria looked at Ethan. "Now we have threat language, a tampering indicator, and a financial motive." Ethan nodded once. "Now you have probable cause." Maria's mouth tightened. "Now we have an arrest." Lena swallowed hard. The victory didn't look like celebration in her face. It looked like dread. "Once you arrest him," she said quietly, "he'll know I didn't disappear." Maria's gaze softened, but only slightly. "He already knows. That's why he sent guards." Lena's hands trembled. Shadow lifted his head, eyes on her. Lena noticed, and for a moment her expression softened toward the dog, like she remembered what it felt like to be seen without being hunted. Ethan stood. "We do it clean." Maria nodded. "We do it now." They didn't roll up with a parade of sirens. They rolled up with inevitability. Maria drove the lead vehicle to a modern, well-maintained house near the edge of Red Hollow's newer district, one of those places that tried to look humble while still showing you it had money. Clean gravel, fresh paint, a security camera above the garage like an unblinking eye. Ethan's jaw tightened as he saw it. That camera wasn't for safety. It was for control. Maria parked across the street. Lucas swallowed, hand near his belt. Ethan stepped out with Shadow at heel. Lena stayed in the vehicle, low, out of sight. This wasn't her moment to be visible. Maria approached the porch with warrant folder in hand, posture straight. Lucas flanked her on the right. Ethan on the left, Shadow slightly behind. Silent, present, a tactical truth. Maria knocked. The door opened after a beat. A man stood there, early 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a pressed sweater like he expected company. His eyes were calm, in the way some people's eyes were calm because they'd never believed consequences would touch them. He looked at Maria, then Lucas, then Ethan. His gaze paused on Shadow. He smiled slightly as if amused. "Can I help you?" he asked. Maria's voice didn't waver. "Yes, step outside." The man's smile held. "Why?" Maria held up the warrant. "You're under arrest in connection with the death of a contractor at the utility corridor site, obstruction, and financial fraud tied to the development project." The man's eyes narrowed a fraction. "That's ridiculous." Maria's tone didn't shift. "Turn around." For the first time something cracked behind his calm, anger quick and hot. "You people don't have—" Ethan spoke, low. "Don't." One word, not a threat, a boundary. The man's gaze snapped to Ethan. He looked like he wanted to measure Ethan, to decide whether he could intimidate him too. Then his eyes dropped to Shadow. Shadow stared back, silent, ears forward. No aggression, just the absolute certainty of a protector. The man's throat moved. His confidence faltered for half a second. Maria stepped forward. "Turn around, hands behind your back." The man exhaled sharply, then did it, slow, like he was performing compliance while promising revenge in his head. Handcuffs clicked. Lucas's shoulders loosened as if his body had been braced for violence. Maria read the rights. The man didn't speak, but as Maria guided him down the porch steps, he turned his head slightly, eyes scanning the street, searching. He wasn't looking for witnesses. He was looking for Lena, and he didn't see her. Good. Maria put him in the back seat of the patrol vehicle. Lucas shut the door. Ethan didn't feel relief. He felt the next truth. Arrest was not closure. Arrest was only the moment the predator realized the hunt had reversed. Maria approached Lena's vehicle afterward. "He's in custody." Lena's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She nodded like she was accepting a fact that had taken too long. Ethan opened the door for her. She stepped out, and for the first time in weeks stood in open air without flinching. Shadow sat at her side, close enough to steady her, not close enough to trap her. Lena looked down at him and whispered, "Thank you." Shadow blinked slowly. Ethan watched it and felt something unfamiliar, a small, sharp ache behind his ribs. Not pain, not fear. Recognition that this moment of truth, was why he'd never been able to fully leave the job behind. The world didn't need more noise. It needed more people who held a line. Maria's voice broke the moment gently. "We're reopening the case officially. The lab will confirm tampering. The financial trail will solidify motive." Lena exhaled. "So it's over?" Maria's eyes didn't lie. "The trial won't be easy, but the lie is over." Lena nodded slowly. Ethan glanced out toward the desert horizon, where the sky had begun to darken again. Storm clouds were gathering in the distance, thin gray streaks that promised cold. The desert didn't care about human justice. But Ethan did. And now, whether he liked it or not, he'd become part of Lena's survival story. The motel didn't become peaceful because a man was arrested. It became quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that comes after a fight, when your body still expects impact, but none comes, when the adrenaline has nowhere to go, so it turns into fatigue that feels like grief. Ethan returned to the motel, with Shadow at his side and Lena riding in the passenger seat, staring out the window like she was seeing the world for the first time in weeks. They pulled into the lot. The neon sign buzzed once, weak and stubborn. Ethan stepped out and looked at the building again. He'd bought it for a fresh start. It had become a crime scene, a refuge, a battleground, a courtroom exhibit. Lena stood beside him. "I can't stay here forever," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "You shouldn't." Maria and Lucas arrived later, walking through the motel office like they were evaluating a problem they needed to solve, not a place they needed to admire. Maria's gaze moved across the cracked lobby, the dusty chairs, the peeling walls. "You really bought this?" Ethan gave a faint exhale that could have been a laugh if it had more warmth in it. "County sale." Maria's eyes narrowed. "And now it's in your name." "Yes." Maria looked at the motel again, then back at Ethan. "You planning to keep it?" Ethan's first instinct was honest. No, he'd planned to sell it, flip it, walk away. He'd planned to disappear into the desert and let time do what time did. But then Shadow shifted at his side and sat, scanning the lot as if it were theirs now to protect, as if property lines weren't paper but responsibility. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Lena spoke quietly. "It's not just a motel. It's leverage. It's a place that doesn't belong to them anymore." Maria's gaze softened a fraction, then turned practical again. "The development project is going to get audited. That's going to stall money, which means there's going to be fallout." Lucas scratched his jaw. "Fallout as in angry people?" Maria didn't look away. "Fallout as in debts, liens, threats. People who lose money don't always lose quietly." Ethan nodded once. He understood that language. It was the language of consequences. The next weeks proved Maria right. Bills arrived like insults. Back taxes the county hadn't bothered to mention. Utility fees. A lien notice from a contractor company tied to the same project, the kind of paperwork that showed how deep rot went. Lena sat at the motel office desk with a calculator and documents spread out like a battlefield map. "This isn't sustainable," she said, voice tight. "The motel's been dead. It doesn't generate income. It's a hole." Ethan leaned back in a chair that squeaked under his weight. "I didn't buy it to run a business." Lena looked at him. "Then why did you buy it?" Ethan's mouth tightened. Because he wanted silence. Because he wanted to stop being needed. Because he wanted to stop waking up at night with his nervous system convinced the world was about to explode. But he didn't say that. He said something truer in its own way. "I bought it because no one else would." Lena's eyes held his. She didn't push. Maria and Lucas came by frequently, checking security, updating Lena on the case, making sure the motel didn't become a soft target. Lucas, trying to lighten the mood, joked once, "So, you're like the desert motel sheriff now?" Ethan didn't smile, but he didn't correct him either. Then the weather turned. Desert winter wasn't a slow drift into cold, it was an ambush. One day the sun still warmed the cracked asphalt by noon. The next, the wind arrived like a blade, sharp, relentless, carrying sand that stung skin and erased visibility. The forecast called it an unusual cold front. Ethan called it what it was, a test. The first night the storm hit, the motel shook. Not structurally, not yet, but in the way the wind found every weakness and demanded payment. Lena sat on the floor of one of the units, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the building moan. Ethan moved through the motel with a flashlight, checking doors, checking windows, checking the old electrical panel like it was a living thing that might betray them. Shadow padded behind him, steady. At 0300, Ethan woke up sitting upright in bed, heart hammering. Not because he'd heard something, because his body remembered something. The wind hitting the side of the motel became, in his mind, the distant crack of something else. The groan of metal became a different groan. His breathing turned shallow. His hands searched for a weapon that wasn't there. Then Shadow was on the bed, climbing halfway onto Ethan's chest, heavy, warm, real. Ethan pressed a hand into Shadow's fur and forced his lungs to match the dog's steady breathing. "Just wind," Ethan whispered. Shadow didn't move until Ethan's pulse slowed. Across the hall, Lena had heard the movement. She didn't knock. She didn't ask questions that would force Ethan to talk about things he'd spent years sealing inside. In the morning, she simply placed a mug of coffee on the motel office counter next to him and said quietly, "The storm didn't win." Ethan looked at her. That was all. But the silence between them changed. It became less like isolation and more like understanding. The storm brought a new problem: power. The motel's wiring was old. The transformer outside buzzed and then went dark in the middle of the night. The motel went black. Ethan moved instantly, grabbing a headlamp, checking the breaker panel, then stepping outside into the wind. Sand and ice stung his face. Shadow stayed close, body angled to block the worst of the gusts. Ethan found the external panel, pried it open, and saw the truth. A damaged line, likely stressed by age and wind. Not sabotage, just neglect. Neglect still killed. He worked with gloved hands, moving by feel, rerouting power through the generator system the motel had for emergencies. The generator coughed, sputtered, then caught. Lights flickered back on. Lena exhaled from inside like she'd been holding her breath. Lucas showed up the next day with a grin and 2 bags of supplies. "Maria said you'd be stubborn enough to try fixing a whole motel in a storm," he said. Ethan took the supplies without thanks. Lucas didn't seem offended. He looked at Shadow and knelt, offering a cautious hand. "Hey, big guy." Shadow sniffed, then nudged Lucas's fingers lightly. Lucas smiled like that mattered more than any human approval. Maria arrived later, face tired but focused. She looked at Ethan. "The case is moving. Defense is going to attack Lena's credibility." Lena's jaw tightened. "Of course." Maria nodded. "So we reinforce facts. You keep documenting. Ethan, you keep the perimeter clean. No more surprises." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You expecting another attempt?" Maria's gaze didn't waver. When people feel cornered, they reach for shortcuts. Sometimes they reach for violence. Ethan nodded once. He'd known that before she said it. The storm eased after 3 days, leaving the desert scraped, raw, and cold. The motel still stood. But the ledger didn't look better. Debt didn't care about justice. Lena sat at the desk again, papers spread out. "We have maybe 2 months before the county starts proceedings." Ethan stared at the numbers. He'd seen worse odds. In war, you could win with bad odds if you had discipline and a plan. He looked at the motel outside the office window. 10 rooms, an old pool, a broken sign. He looked at Lena, tired but unbroken. He looked at Shadow, steady, loyal, present. And he realized something uncomfortable. He had intended to leave after the arrest. But he hadn't. Not because he was trapped, because he was choosing not to run. Maria's voice came in his head, practical, fallout. Lena's voice came in his head, steady, leverage. Ethan exhaled and stood. Lena looked up. "Where are you going?" Ethan grabbed his jacket. "To make the motel useful." Lucas, sitting on the office chair like he owned it, blinked. "You got a plan?" Ethan looked at him. "You good with paperwork?" Lucas groaned. "No." Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Then you're learning." Shadow stood instantly, ready. Ethan pushed open the office door and stepped out into the cold desert air. Not running from the world, walking back into it. Ethan's plan wasn't flashy. It wasn't save the day with some dramatic grand opening or a cinematic montage that pretended money and trauma could be solved by a single sunrise. It was the kind of plan that lived in the small, disciplined space between collapse and survival. He started with the perimeter, because when you'd spent years in systems that failed, you learned this. You don't build comfort first, you build control. Comfort comes later, if it comes at all. He walked the motel lot with Shadow at heel, the dog moving in a calm, scanning pattern that read like a map. Ethan noted where the wind piled sand against doors, where old floodlights didn't work, where the fence had a gap wide enough for someone to slip through at night. He didn't imagine enemies behind every shadow. He simply removed shadows as advantages. Lucas showed up the next day with a clipboard and the kind of forced enthusiasm rookies used when they wanted to help but didn't want to admit they were scared. Maria came too, because Maria didn't believe in leaving people to face consequences alone once she'd pulled them into a fight. She didn't say that out loud. She just arrived. Practical, steady, carrying a tool bag like she'd always belonged in places where work had to be done. Lena stood in the office doorway watching them. Her eyes looked less hunted now, still tired, still carrying grief, but no longer collapsing into fear. "Okay," Lucas said, clapping his hands once too loudly. "What are we doing? Renovation? Rebranding? Murder motel, but make it cute?" Maria shot him a look. Lucas shut up. Ethan didn't respond verbally. He pointed toward the neon sign. "First, that." Lucas squinted up at the half-lit letters. "That thing's older than my dad." "Then it's got practice surviving," Ethan said. It was one of the few jokes he'd ever made that sounded like a joke. Lucas blinked, then grinned like he'd just been given permission to breathe. "Copy." They worked. Not in a montage, just in reality. Ethan repaired the light fixtures with slow patience, testing wires like they were trussed. Lucas hauled junk out of rooms that smelled like abandonment and old cigarettes. Maria documented everything. Expenses, receipts, county requirements, because she understood the same thing Ethan did. If you didn't keep paperwork clean, someone would use dirt against you. Lena became the brain, not because she needed to be useful to deserve safety, but because that was who she was, an analyst who didn't know how to stop seeing patterns. She sat at the office desk with a laptop, building spreadsheets, calculating cost versus revenue, outlining what they could do without forcing new scenes into existence. Her conclusions were simple. "We don't need guests," she said one evening, eyes on the screen. Not at first. Lucas looked up from scrubbing a window. "How do you run a motel without guests?" Lena turned the laptop toward them. "We can rent rooms as short-term storage for county contractors who need a safe place for equipment during winter, or emergency housing for utility crews. There's a shortage out here when storms hit. People need a place that's functional, not pretty." Maria nodded. "And that keeps it within zoning." Ethan's eyes narrowed, impressed. "How fast can we get it legal?" Maria flipped open her notebook. "If we pass inspection, but we need basic safety. Fire extinguishers, functioning locks, working smoke detectors." Ethan glanced up, a humorless edge in his eyes. "Smoke detectors I can handle." Lena's mouth tightened, remembering. Ethan didn't apologize. He didn't romanticize the fact that the motel had been a hiding place. He simply made sure it wouldn't have to be that kind of hiding place again. When the first utility crew arrived after a cold snap hit the highway and stranded travelers, the motel wasn't glamorous. But it was lit. It was warm. The doors locked, the coffee pot worked, and Shadow stood in the office doorway like a silent guarantee. The crew didn't ask questions. They didn't need a story. They needed shelter. Ethan didn't need to be thanked. He just needed the motel to stop bleeding money. Little by little, it did. Debt didn't vanish, but it stopped growing teeth. The case didn't disappear into paperwork either. Maria kept Lena informed. Lucas brought updates like a courier of consequences. One afternoon, as wind rattled the motel sign again, Lucas burst into the office with his phone in his hand and an expression that tried to be casual and failed. "They're pushing hard," he said. Maria, sitting at the desk with a stack of forms, didn't look up. "Defense always pushes hard," Lucas swallowed. "They're calling her unstable. They're saying she was paranoid, that she recorded the meeting without consent, that she—" Lena's fingers went cold. Ethan looked at Lucas, voice low. "Stop!" Lucas stopped mid-sentence. Ethan turned to Lena. Not soft, not gentle, steady. "What do we have?" Lena blinked. "What?" Ethan repeated, patient. "What do we have?" The question was a lifeline. Facts, not feelings. Lena drew in a breath. Her shoulders straightened. "We have the recording. We have the utility logs. We have the scene documentation. We have the financial trail. We have the warrants. We have chain of custody." Maria finally looked up, eyes sharp. "And we have you alive to testify." Lena's jaw tightened. Then she nodded. "Yes." Ethan nodded back once. Shadow moved to Lena's side and sat, his shoulder pressed lightly against her shin. Quiet grounding, no words. Lucas exhaled. Okay. That's actually a lot." Maria's mouth quirked slightly. "It's enough." Ethan didn't trust enough until it held under pressure, but he trusted Maria's understanding of pressure. The defense tried to make the motel look like a conspiracy, tried to paint Ethan as a vigilante, tried to paint Lena as a hysteric who needed rescuing. Maria didn't fight them with emotion. She fought them with structure. And structure was Ethan's native language. He provided statements about the guards, about the retrieval, about chain. He made it boring. Boring was good. Boring meant truth, had no gaps for drama to crawl into. Winter deepened again. One night, a windstorm hit so hard the motel's old fence moaned. Sand hammered the windows like thrown gravel. The neon sign flickered, buzzed, and went dark. Ethan was outside immediately, jacket pulled tight, headlamp cutting red light through dust. Maria called from the doorway, voice sharp. "Ethan, visibility's trash. Get back inside." Ethan didn't argue. He didn't have pride about weather. Pride was how people died doing stupid things. He returned to the office, where Lena stood staring at the window, tension in every line of her body. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Lena's voice was thin. "Headlights." Ethan's spine went still. He moved to the blinds and peered through the crack. A vehicle was parked at the edge of the lot, engine running, lights off now, just a dark shape against a darker night. Watching. Lucas's voice came from behind, too loud. "That's not a utility crew." Maria's hand moved toward her radio. Ethan didn't move toward the door. He didn't chase. He didn't give the watcher the satisfaction of control. He studied. The vehicle didn't approach, didn't leave, just sat. Shadow stood by the window too, ears forward, body tense but silent. Lena's breathing quickened. "He found me." Maria's voice was calm. "No, someone's trying to make you think that." Ethan's eyes stayed on the vehicle. "It's pressure," Maria nodded, "and pressure is how they make people crack." Lucas swallowed. "So what do we do?" Ethan didn't look away from the lot. "We don't react." Shadow gave a single, low warning sound, not a bark, a controlled vibration that said, "I see you. Don't come closer." The vehicle's headlights flashed on suddenly, bright through dust, then off again. A message. Lena flinched. Ethan's hand moved to Shadow's harness, not restraining, communicating. "Stay steady." Maria spoke into her radio, voice measured. "Unit requesting patrol check on Route 19 by the old motel. Suspicious vehicle idling." Lucas blinked. "We got units out here?" Maria's eyes stayed hard. "We do now." The vehicle waited another minute, then rolled away, tires spitting gravel. It didn't speed off like a guilty man. It left like a man who wanted them to know he could come back. Lena's voice broke. "I can't do this forever." Ethan turned from the window, face calm. "You don't have to." Lena's eyes flashed. "But you," Ethan interrupted gently. "I do." "Not martyrdom. Decision." Maria watched him for a long beat, then nodded slowly. "We increase patrols. We reinforce lighting. We don't let them isolate you." Lucas looked between them, nervous energy flickering. "And if they come back?" Ethan's gaze dropped to Shadow. Shadow met it. Silent agreement. Ethan's voice was low. "Then they learn what it costs." The storm passed like storms did, leaving damage behind and pretending it hadn't done anything at all. In daylight, the motel looked tired again. Peeling paint, sand drifts, a sign that refused to stay lit. But inside, something had changed. Not the building, the people. Lena sat at the desk with her laptop open, but she wasn't shaking anymore. She wasn't hiding behind the utility room chair. She looked up at Ethan and said quietly, "I didn't expect you to stay." Ethan didn't answer immediately, because he hadn't expected it either. He'd expected to leave the moment the arrest was done, expected the motel to be a bridge he crossed and burned behind him. But the motel had become something else, a place where truth had been held long enough for law to catch up. He looked at Shadow, who lay with his head on his paws, eyes open, always watching, always present. He thought of the nights he'd woken up with his heart trying to outrun his body. The way Shadow had pressed his weight against him until reality returned. He thought of Lena, forced into hiding because truth threatened people with money. He thought of Maria, fighting bureaucracy without losing her spine. He thought of Lucas trying to turn eagerness into competence. And he realized this wasn't a detour. It was a pattern. The world kept placing him at the edge of things that broke, and he kept choosing to hold the line. Lena's voice softened. "You said you bought this because no one else would." Ethan nodded once. Lena's eyes held his. "You don't have to keep doing that alone." Ethan's throat tightened. Not because he wanted to cry, because he'd been alone so long that partnership felt like something that belonged to other people. Maria stepped into the office, expression pragmatic as ever. "County inspection is scheduled next week." Lucas popped his head in behind her. "And I filed the forms without spelling your name wrong, which is basically a miracle." Maria shot him a look. "It's your job." Lucas shrugged. "Still a miracle." Shadow rose, stretched once, then walked over to Lena and nudged her hand lightly with his nose. Lena's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Ethan watched that and felt something inside him loosen. A tiny knot he hadn't known was still tied. He stood and walked to the office window. Outside, the desert stretched open and indifferent. But the motel lot looked different now. Lights repaired, doors secured, a few rooms occupied by a utility crew eating lunch in the shade. Life where there had been abandonment. Ethan turned back to the room. "I was going to leave," he admitted. Maria's eyes softened slightly. Lucas blinked, surprised. Lena's gaze stayed steady. Ethan continued, voice low. "I came here for silence, for distance, for the kind of quiet where nobody needs anything from you." He paused. "Then Lena was in my building." Lena's throat moved. And Shadow told me the truth before I even saw it, Ethan said, glancing down at the dog. Fear doesn't hide well from him. Shadow's ears flicked once, like he knew exactly what Ethan meant. Ethan looked at Lena. You said you don't need saving. Lena nodded. I don't. Ethan nodded back. Good, because that's not what this is. Maria watched him, understanding. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, suddenly quiet. Ethan's voice steadied. This is partnership, work, building something that doesn't belong to them. Lena's breath hitched. You'd stay? Ethan didn't romanticize it. He didn't promise forever. He made a decision. Yes, he said simply, I'll stay. Lena exhaled, and this time the relief did show. Soft, human, real. Maria nodded once, satisfied. Then we do it right. Lucas grinned. So, we're like a motel squad. Maria sighed. Lucas. He held up his hands. Fine, no nicknames. Shadow stepped closer to Ethan and pressed his shoulder lightly against Ethan's thigh. Ethan's hand dropped to Shadow's head, fingers sinking into thick fur. A grounding point. A promise without words. Outside, the wind moved across the desert like it always did, restless, testing. But the motel didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like a place Ethan had chosen, not to hide, to stand. And for the first time in a long time, that choice didn't feel like punishment. It felt like purpose.